The first victim is 34-year-old Micah Holsenbach. He was reported missing in March of 2018. So Micah joined the military shortly after 9/11 when he learned about a growth in his throat. He was medically discharged in 2003 to get it surgically removed. The surgery was a success, and thankfully the growth was benign. And he was prescribed Vicodin for the pain, and this began an addiction. Micah got into Oxycontin, and it wasn't pretty. He OD'd on Oxycontin laced with fentanyl in 2015. Even though he survived, this event began a downward spiral. Micah became distant from his family and lost his job. Since he didn't have a steady income anymore, Micah began assembling and selling illegal firearms with some guy named Matthew to make ends meet. Something to know about this Micah is he was always on his phone. So when he didn't reply to any of his mom's texts over Easter weekend of 2018, that's when she got concerned and later reported him missing. 1 week after Micah was reported missing, another tragedy took place in Bakersfield, which takes us to victim number 2, 38-year-old James Kolstad. On April 8th, James was shot and slain in a drive-by. That night, James borrowed his mom's car to drive over to the house of someone who owed him money. James' brother Ryan had actually been hanging out at that person's house and told his brother not to come. Ryan went out to run a quick errand, and when he came back to the house, he saw James pulling up. Out of nowhere, bullets were flying. They were coming from another car that zoomed by. Suddenly, Ryan was holding his brother in his last moments alive as one of the bullets hit James in an artery. A police report was made and Ryan was questioned. No one had any idea who the perpetrator was. Similar to Micah, James was also addicted to substances. He got hit by a car in 2007, which resulted in a broken arm and a wrist. James's broken arm was very bad. He had all sorts of pins in there, keeping everything in place. So he was obviously given pain meds. One thing led to another, and before he knew it, James was addicted to fentanyl and heroin. As time passed, James's life slowly crumbled. He lost his job and apartment, so he moved back in with his mom, Diane, or Di for short. About 2 weeks after James's passing, Di realized something. James and Micah were apparently friends. Now, if Micah went missing and James was just executed, perhaps their cases were connected? With a gut feeling she couldn't deny, Di reached out to Micah's mom, Cheryl. Cheryl and Di didn't actually know each other at this point, but their sons had each brought up the other in conversation, which is why they knew the two were friends. Other people later confirmed this as well. As Cheryl and Di got to know each other and their sons' cases, tragedy struck yet again. This brings us to victim number 3, 20-year-old Bailey Despot. On April 25th, 2018, Bailey was reported missing. Bailey had quite a hard life in very concerning circumstances. When she was young, Bailey was all about princess costumes and anything girly. In high school, she joined the FFA, or Future Farmers of America, which is a program that teaches students to raise and sell livestock. Bailey raised pigs and a rabbit during her time in FFA. After graduation, Bailey got married, moved to Las Vegas, and got a job at a restaurant. 2017 was a big year for Bailey. She got in a car accident, was arrested twice, sexually assaulted twice, filed for a restraining order against someone, and was handed divorce papers from her husband. Bailey's first arrest actually took place outside of Micah's house. With all this crazy shit going on, Bailey resorted to substances and OD'd. She survived, but it wasn't an easy road to recovery. Bailey was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Her mom believed that she had an eating disorder, and now she was missing. Bailey's mom, Jane, was beside herself. She didn't know how to function or what to do, but tried everything in her power to find her daughter and bring her home. One of Jane's efforts was posting missing person flyers around town. She actually calls herself Flyer Girl because she was always posting flyers everywhere. Jane would always keep a stapler, a roll of tape, and pepper spray with her at all times. This is because she wanted to be ready to post a flyer whenever she saw an empty pole. As for the pepper spray, I think it was just for her to have some form of defense in case she followed a lead that got too dangerous. Micah's dad saw one of those flyers and had a feeling this girl's case was connected to his son's. He texted the number on the flyer, which was Jane's. The two connected and quickly learned their children were friends. Micah's mom, Cheryl, reached out and began talking about how Micah and Bailey's disappearance could be related. Jane apparently got very overwhelmed with this and was hard to get in touch with. But after another phone call and an in-person meetup, Jane and Cheryl worked together closely to try and solve their kids' cases. They discovered that there was a person close to both Micah and Bailey that might be involved or know more information about the victim's whereabouts. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but leading up to his disappearance, Micah had been building and selling illegal firearms. He was apparently doing this with a man named Matthew Queen, who just so happened to be Bailey's boyfriend and roommate. Now, at some point in her numerous hours of research, Cheryl read about this company called And, which offers DNA testing, which results available in 2 hours or less. So Cheryl was just like, this is good to know. She sent the information over to Jane and Di, who both looked into the company as well. In July of 2018, a woman's leg washed up at a lake near Bakersfield. Jane had a feeling it belonged to Bailey, but it was a false alarm. 1 month later, a group of boys were playing at Kern River when they saw a plastic bag wash up with a human arm in it. When the arm was discovered, it was sent to a government DNA testing lab in Sacramento. The process of testing DNA like this could take over a year, and I guess there was reason to believe that this arm was Micah's. So James's mom, Di, set up a meeting with government officials and begged them to test the DNA through Andy. They agreed. And let me tell you, moms know how to get shit done. The DNA was a match for Micah's, meaning that this was his arm. Once the results were in, Di and Jane went to Kern River to leave flowers for Micah. These moms developed such a strong bond over the months, and they had each other's backs. It's a devastatingly beautiful element to the Bakersfield 3 case. Jane often searched the Kern River for any other pieces of evidence related to Micah or Bailey's case. Jane had several dreams about this river and even consulted a psychic medium who believed the river had something to do with Bailey's case. So Jane would stop by, roll up her pants, get in the water, and look for clues. When Micah's arm was found, the category of his case officially changed from a disappearance to a homicide. By this point, the three moms had already appeared on local news stations to share information about their kids' cases. They were attending board meetings to get more attention for their cases and offer suggestions on how to be more thorough in the investigations, because I'm sure you guessed the authorities weren't trying their hardest to solve these cases. They hosted a fundraiser and gathered $17,000, which was given to the sheriff's office to buy sonar scanning equipment to help search the river and other bodies of water for evidence. In August of 2021, the authorities located a human skull in the river. It's unclear if it was found using the new sonar scanner, but I'd like to think so. Now let's take it back to 2019. So that dude, Matthew Queen, became a main suspect in Micah's case, and he was being investigated for quite some time. In July of 2019, Matthew was arrested for other charges involving weapons and an alleged kidnapping. By May of the following year, investigators on Micah's case felt strongly enough about Matthew's guilt that they charged him for the torture and demise of Micah. The authorities confirmed that Micah was indeed helping Matthew with manufacturing illegal firearms. Micah was also apparently really scared of Matthew and paranoid about him doing something leading up to his disappearance. But Matthew wasn't the only person to face these charges. There were two others. First is Matthew Van Castile. Investigator believed Matthew V's garage was where Micah was slain. Matthew V quickly agreed to tell the police everything in exchange for a 4-year sentence. The second is Bailey Despot. The police thought she may have been involved in the crime as well. You'd think that they'd wait until she was found to charge her at least. Or perhaps the reason she's missing is because one or both Matthews did something bad to her. Here's a story the detectives came up with using evidence in Matthew V's statement. Micah stole a firearm from Matthew Q. Matthew Q found out about this and took Micah over to Matthew V's house with his girl, Bailey. There they zip-tied Micah's arms. Bailey went in to grab a blade, and Matthew V looked up ways to dissolve a body. Bailey and Matthew Q began cutting up Micah's body, which Matthew V was tasked to dispose of. Matthew V drove out to a river and tossed Micah's remains in the water. Jane was flabbergasted to hear about her daughter's charges. She told reporters the Bailey everyone knows and loves would never ever do anything that horrific to anybody unless her life was in danger or she was threatened, or maybe she was drugged. Jane is certain there is more to the story, but she's having trouble pulling the evidence to prove this. On the National Missing and Unidentified Persons system, Bailey's last location shows up as an empty lot across an orchard. Jane has no idea how this location was pulled, and she hasn't found any clues over there either. Apparently, Matthew Q took Micah to the same location a few months before he was slain. Whatever happened in that lot ended with Matthew Q holding Micah at gunpoint and Micah running away, scared for his life. So there's a strong possibility Matthew Q took Bailey over there and executed her. Once Bailey's charges were announced, Jane and Cheryl gave each other some space. Cheryl doesn't necessarily think Bailey did it, but wants to spare Jane the details about Micah's torture since her daughter may have played a role in it. In the spring of 2022, Matthew Q went to trial for Micah's murder. This was his version of the story. Matthew, Micah, and Bailey were all at Matthew's house. Micah pulled a firearm on Matthew, and when Bailey came in the room, Micah shifted his aim to her. With Micah focused on Bailey, Matthew tackled Micah, and a struggle ensued. As the two were fighting on the floor, Bailey grabbed a 40-pound dumbbell and dropped it on Micah's head. And she apparently didn't mean to. I don't know how many people casually carry around a 40-pound weight or over people's heads. Matthew and Bailey realized the weight killed Micah. And with that, they panicked and rushed to find a solution. Matthew didn't want to call the cops because he had previous firearm charges. So instead, he was like, I have an idea. Why don't we just wrap up Micah's body in plastic and chop it up? This testimony is a little far-fetched if you ask me, but Matthew Q stood by it. He pleaded not guilty, on all 35 charges that he faced. The jury found Matthew guilty for most of the charges, including the execution of Micah, the abduction of someone else, several weapon charges, and more. And as of now, Matthew is currently awaiting his sentencing. And in July of 2022, Matthew was convicted of a second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison plus 56 years. As for the other two victims, their cases remain stagnant. Bailey's still missing, and the perp in James's slaying has yet to be identified. If you think you have any information about any of these three victims as it pertains to this case, please go to Bakersfield3.com to find the correct number to call for each victim's case. Thanks again for watching another episode of Killer Bites. My name is Mack, and I'll see you guys next time.